But we're working specifically on internal structures to allow more members of USPath to become engaged in the organization's running and activities through various committees. We're working to develop a much more robust internal response for communications when policy issues come up or important timely matters, as well as new scientific discoveries that may come out for us to be able to put out statements. And I think probably the most important thing that I want to focus on for my presidency is focusing on efforts for diversity, equity, anti-exclusion, and anti-oppression. And I would like to read a somewhat prepared statement that I have about this. That folks who attended the previous meeting may have heard something very similar, but I do feel it's very important to take a moment for me to make some remarks about this, and then we can turn it over to the rest of the board and begin the program. So I do feel that we need to go beyond ideas, rhetoric, and hand waving that often comes up in discussions of diversity, equity, anti-exclusion, and anti-oppression. And if you look at the board members, you just look at our faces right now, we're not a very diverse group, and we need strategies with results. And some of this starts with the board and taking action. Some of it starts with the membership of the organization taking action. And so everyone needs to recognize the privileges in the space that they occupy, from a range of intersectional lines, be it racial and ethnic, immigration status, socioeconomic status, HIV serostatus ability, cisgender privilege, etc. And so the board has spent the last couple of years with doing a great deal of soul searching. There have been many discussions. We did undergo a formal training program. And now we do feel poised and empowered to begin. So I say begin because I think was something we just really need to start doing. And I don't want to tell you that we have results because we're just starting. But begin working on meaningful and implementable solutions, including exploring pipeline efforts to develop the next generation of leaders and a generation of leaders who are diverse and intersectional. We can't have true and inclusive justice if we don't have an inclusive and diverse and anti-oppressive approach. We can't, to speak much more concrete terms, trans people of color are not going to experience justice if trans people of color are always serving as as community advisory board members and research subjects. We need trans people of color of any gender status in leadership roles, in investigator roles, and in provider roles. And I see it as a core responsibility of USPath as a professional organization to develop and implement strategies in these areas that will bring about change and solutions. And I see figuring out exactly how to do that as a core vision for my own presidency in the next 2 years. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that. One thing I did want to lay out for participants in this session is that we did receive a couple of questions that came in initially, and we expect that we might get some more questions too that are scientific in nature. Anything from like, what do you think about this kind of surgery, to how many milligrams, or should I be getting this kind of test or that kind of test? We are not going to be able to answer specific scientific questions during the session, and it's for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is that the USPath Board is a governing body, not a scientific body. We don't want to set a precedent that whomever happens to be elected to the USPath Board are also given the role of scientific expert. We want the USPath Board to be a governing body and a delegating body, and it certainly raises something that the board has already been discussing today about having vehicles and mechanisms for communicating new scientific information or responding to scientific inquiries that would be of interest to the community. This just isn't the right body to do it, whether or not there might be expertise on the board in this particular moment or not. This isn't the right body to do it, and we don't want to set that precedent. So we won't be able to answer specific scientific questions. So what I'd like to do next is turn this over, and I'll use my Brady Bunch board here and just call on board members to briefly just say your name and where you work, and then we can jump in. We have a couple of questions that have already come in, and we have some prepared. Actually, what we'll do is we'll introduce the board, and then I'm going to answer the first question, and then we'll hand it over to other members who are going to answer other questions. So, Dr. Safer.
So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for participating. I'm Josh Safer, the past president and soon departing member of the board. I'm an endocrinologist by training, and I have the privilege of being the executive director of the transgender program at Mount Sinai in New York City.
Thank you, Nova.
Hi, folks. My name is Nova Bradford. I am the outgoing student member of the board, so we're currently in the process of electing the new student member who will come onto the board next month. And I am a clinical social worker based in Minnesota.
Thank you, Erica. Oh, you're on mute.
All these switches. Thank you. Outgoing president of Uspath. For recent years, I've been at UCSF in the Child and Adolescent Gender Center and in private practice. I'm rotating out of that and doing some consulting.
Thank you, Zil.
My name is Zil Goldstein. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Associate Medical Director for TGNB Health at Callan Lord Community Health Center in New York.
Thank you. Lisa?
Hey, I'm Lisa Griffin. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland recently. Prior to that was in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a clinical psychologist who exclusively in my practice, I see trans and gender expansive children and teens and their families.
Thank you. Amelia?
Hello, Amelia Lombardi. I'm the chair of the Public Health Department at Baldwin Wallace University, and I am the outgoing secretary of USPAC.
Thank you. Caroline?
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Davidge-Pitts. I'm an associate professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic and an adult endocrinologist, and I'm the medical director for the gender program here at Mayo Clinic.
Thank you. Joe?
Hi, my name is Joe Olson Kennedy. I'm the medical director of the Center for Trans Youth Health and Development at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and associate professor of clinical pediatrics at USC. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Courtney?
Courtney, you're muted.
Sorry, muted. I'm Courtney Ridley. I'm an OBGYN working in Crescent City, California. It's a rural location, and my goal is to try to expand and enhance care in the Northern California area.
Thank you. And Carl?
Hi, everybody. I'm Carl. I'm a primary care doctor and assistant professor of medicine at Boston University School of Medicine and the research lead in our Center for Trans Medicine and Surgery. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to answer the first question, and before I do, I want to make a special recognition for our 3 community rapporteurs, Caleb Losciavo, Elijah Castle, and Elias Laulit. I apologize. And I thank Amelia and Zil from the board who helped work with them to develop our rapporteur program. The rapporteur program is part of our effort to communicate the activities within the USPath conference out to the general population and translate the scientific information out to the general population. So that's one of our efforts in trying to increase transparency and communication. So please be on the lookout. There's some amazing information going around out there, some fantastic TikToks I've watched. And so I recommend folks look around for that information. And we might ask Amelia and Zil to make some further remarks about that down the line. Actually, Amelia or Zil, would you like to make a comment now about the rapporteur and where people can get more information about what we've disseminated so far?
Sure. Right now we are posting the reports on our Facebook page, the USPath Facebook page. So if you go there, we've been posting the reports daily, and the last one will be posted tomorrow. We've also been providing links to Twitter so that individuals who interact via that mechanism can link back to Facebook through that. As Maddie mentioned, one of our members has a TikTok that we're also willing to let people know more about as well. And lastly, once the conference kind of winds down, we're going to post all the rapporteur information and other material on the USPath website. So we'll have more of a permanent existence there.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to take the first question, which is actually an amalgamated response to several questions which came in, and I want to just address this briefly, and then we can move on to the remainder of the session. So there have been some questions that have come in regarding a recent publication that involved Dr. Anderson. And the remarks that I'd like to make about that is that this matter has been addressed internally, and that we as a board feel at this time the best course of action is to make no further comments to avoid fueling further media circus around the matter. And we will continue to explore ways in which USPath can foster scientific discussions among experts to improve the quality of care for trans and gender diverse youth. And then also wanting to make some general remarks regarding the concept of and the kind of discussion around the concept of one word used as detransition. I want to make these remarks. Data are limited actually on the proportion of transgender people who quote unquote detransition or retransition, or who otherwise move through a gender journey that brings them close to or back to the sex that they were assigned at birth. Existing studies have numerous limitations, methodologic concerns, and biases. And so unfortunately, this issue has become politicized and weaponized. And at this point, purely scientific and unbiased exploration of the matter has become almost impossible. So that said, it is likely that the degree of media coverage that has been afforded to this experience is well out of proportion to the size and significance of this issue. And among those who do live this experience, many do not see this as regret, but simply as another step in their gender journey. In any case, there are many high priority and urgent public health crises facing the trans and gender diverse community, including high rates of emotional trauma, sexual violence, discrimination, lack of legal protections, HIV, inadequate access to healthcare and housing, family rejection, violence, and or underemployment. We are in an epidemic of murders of transgender women and trans feminine people, especially those of color. USPath will focus its efforts on these pressing matters while continuing to support the scientific exploration and discussion, not in the court of public opinion nor the political arena or talk show pundits, but the scientific exploration and discussion of the full spectrum of topics and questions in gender affirming and transition related health and care. So thank you very much. We have a question that has come in that I believe Dr. Olson Kennedy is going to answer. What are the possible psychological impacts of the recent wave of anti-transgender laws, negative political rhetoric, and even comments by comedians upon the mental health of transgender persons and their loved ones? How do we help our transgender clients be their authentic selves in a world increasingly being filled with misinformation about their essential identities? Dr. Olson Kennedy?
Well, thanks for this really nuanced and thoughtful question. I think it's something that we as an internal team at my program talk about, and certainly the members of this board talk about. What's happening, I feel like, in the world of trans care and the politicization of it is a microcosm of what's happening in the country at large, with this sort of very divisive, very tenuous, very trepidatious landscape that is really problematic for people who are already burdened with trying to figure out how to get their healthcare needs met, as well as their mental health needs met, as well as just the things that people deserve and need to function and fully survive and hopefully thrive. And I can tell you that among the young people that are seeking services and receiving services at our program, this is severely impacting people's mental health. While I'm in California and people recognize that we absolutely protect the rights of trans folks and trans youths specifically as well, that always feels precarious for people. And it's not healthy for people to be seeing their own family, siblings, community members attacked in other states as well. And so this has been really harmful for young people and their families, sometimes parents who are already worried and seeking information, and now they're getting bombarded with a lot of this information. It's really important for us as providers to acknowledge that it's happening. I think this is a critical part of making validating people's experiences of this media and consuming of this information that they're forced to do. And it is important to validate that and talk about it, and talk about how we as providers may or may not be playing a role in the advocacy of young people at the legislative level. It's really important to provide people safe spaces within your clinics, within your scope of practice, outside, within peer support groups and family support groups, so that people do have places where they feel safe. And I think that letting people know that we recognize that this is an issue, that our organization is being responsive to this, and that many of us in this organization are also playing a role on the legislative level to provide expert testimony in some of these court cases. And I just, above and beyond that, we just have to continue to support our patients and their families, and the community at large.
Great. Thank you very much. We have our next question is, do you plan to push for FDA approval for directed use of cross-sex hormones for the treatment of transgender people, so that more research and regulation can be done and negative side effects can be taken into account? I think Carl is going to take this as the first and go from there.
Yeah, this is like we're a team. This is a good question in terms of, yes, like the ideal is we'd like to be able to use medications that receive FDA approval, but the reality is that there's a lot of different medications and treatments that we use that never get FDA approval and never require FDA approval in terms of our actual practice in medicine. I know Dr. Safer will definitely speak a little bit more specifically as it relates within the endocrinology practice. But the expectation that all medications we use get FDA approval is an unrealistic expectation, and not something that it really reflects the true practice of medicine. The main thing that USPath really pushes for is the continued use of evidence-based research to inform clinical practice and to inform policies that ensure adequate access for everyone. Josh, I definitely want to pass it to you in terms of, I know we've been having this discussion among the board and more recently as we got this question.
Yeah, so the only thing I would add is that the standard is to have FDA approved medications to use and what that means is that they're just simply considered safe, period. But then in terms of how you use them, then that ends up being best practices based on literature and such. Within endocrinology specifically, most of our hormone preparations predate the FDA and aren't even discussed by the FDA. And throughout everything that we do in medicine and in endocrine, very, very specifically, and to a heavy degree in pediatrics, there aren't FDA indications for all the different permutations of use. That just isn't the standard for medical care. And so to expect that gender affirming medical care specifically would rise to an even higher standard is not a logical thought, and it would be an unfair bar. So just so that people are kind of oriented to how medicine actually works. And so transgender medicine is not different from other medicine in terms of our approach.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions that came in regarding electronic health record data and privacy disclosure of SOGI data. I'm not going to read the entire question. There's a couple of them and they're kind of long, but the take-home question is, do patients have the ability to disable their access to SOGI data? Who has access to what data? And I believe that Caroline is going to take first stab at responding to this.
Thanks, Maddie. And I know you've done a lot of work on this as well, so we can talk. I think this is such an important part of healthcare that we now, most of us are using electronic health records. And I know certainly at Mayo Clinic, we've really been trying to talk about how best to collect SOGI data. So the individual who wrote this question very clearly pointed out there are a lot of important aspects to collecting SOGI data. If we think about how we want to be more inclusive with research, how we want to ensure that we are sensitive to patients who are coming into the clinic and their needs. But there is definitely, I think, a right way and a wrong way to collect this information. As pointed out as well, this is sensitive information. This is not, for example, something that you want any patient calling into your institution, trying to get an appointment in, let's say, dermatology, and whoever is answering that phone call at the institution is asking about that information. I think SOGI data should be collected either by the individual who is going to be coming as a patient to your institution, in other words, self-declared, and it should be optional. And if there is, for example, a time where someone might not have been in a place to have filled that information out either electronically or via paper, that is something to be discussed with the provider that patient or client is going to be seeing. Then that information might not be forthcoming, for example, at a first-time visit. It might require a number of visits to enable that trust in that relationship. And so I definitely think that we all need to think about how best to manage SOGI and how we collect that. I also want to make one additional comment on the question with, can we disable, what happens if someone comes in with an ankle sprain and really doesn't want to disclose this? I think the same way we are able to provide SOGI data when we become a patient at an institution or a clinic, we should be able to amend that as well at any time, because we really understand that often what our patients and clients face is that the assumption that a medical issue is related somehow to their gender identity. And so we really want to make sure we're moving away from that. So Matt, I don't know if you have any additional comments on your experience as well.
I mean, I appreciate everything you said, and I agree. I mean, SOGI data is voluntary, but I think that the issues arise of you are comfortable disclosing that information at the Queer Health Clinic where you get care in town, but then you are visiting your aunt who lives in a small rural community and break your ankle, and the electronic health record systems are linked and information is disclosed. So it does raise a question about should there be specific locks or abilities to put controls on these data. Probably the problem is that the back end of how SOGI data and most electronic health record data is stored is incredibly complicated and discombobulated, to be honest with you. Electronic health records were supposed to make our lives a lot better, but unfortunately they leave a lot to be desired, and they've created a lot of new problems. And there are a lot of the what happens in electronic health records is driven by vendors, by private companies that develop the product. And there are a couple of heavy hitters in the industry who have a great deal of influence about how things are done. And they don't necessarily have a team of scientific experts guiding them on best practices. So there are issues with electronic health records that have their off-the-shelf functionality. For example, one major vendor that I'm familiar with, in the kind of just the banner at the top where it gives you just the patient's name and date of birth, it puts their organs that they have. So it's like, this patient is 26 years old and they live at 123 Any Street and they have a penis. I don't know why that information is there, and I'm working hard to get rid of it in certain contexts, but unfortunately the way the program is written, it's not easy to just make that go away. So we have a lot of work to do at the advocacy level to make sure that these issues are on the radar. A lot of times people see SOGI data and they're like, oh yeah, that's where we write down somebody's gender identity, birth, sex, and their sexual orientation, and we put it in some database and then we're done. But there's actually a lot more to it, including the workflows and how the data are used. Thank you. We have a couple of other questions that came up. Where did that question go? Oh, we had a question that came in that disappeared from my screen, but it had to do, here it is. the question is, will USPath send representatives to explain and defend the standards of care, so presumably the WPATH standards of care, to all of the states who will try to criminalize affirmative care for trans youth? So let's take this as a broader question of what role does and can USPath play when standards of care that have been scientifically agreed upon are at risk of being legislated otherwise. Can USPath get involved? What role can and should USPath play? So I think we have, first Carl is going to make some remarks, and then we'll also hear from Zil.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's one of those things I wish everybody would follow or actually seek our input before they really come up with any kind of laws, good, bad, or otherwise. Naturally, the reality of trying to go out and convince legislatures that are putting forward these anti-trans laws can be quite onerous. So this is one of those situations where we want to highlight the fact that we have an advocacy and community liaison committee that really is focused on this, and this is an opportunity for members to really respond to issues that are within their own jurisdictions. Myself being somebody who practices in Boston, some state legislators are really not going to hear it from me because I'm not a local clinician. So this is one of those things, one of those opportunities where members locally can really get engaged. I would also highlight that USPath, as a professional organization, works with a lot of other organizations to lobby around these issues. Notably, we have strong connections with GLAMA, Health Professionals Advancing LGBTQ Equality, with the American Medical Association, with a number of other professional associations who, like us, have evidence-based guidance and policies around these issues and lobby as it relates to that. So this is one of those things where we really need additional membership opportunities, additional membership input, as well as continued engagement with other professional associations who can help us, because USPath, we are growing. We are not everywhere all at once just yet. Zell, I definitely want to make sure there's way more that can always be said about this.
Sure. I mean, at heart of the question, there's two issues. First of all, we're a 501c3 nonprofit under WPATH, and so we're limited in terms of the amount of lobbying that we can do, and there are severe restrictions on the amount of money that we're able to spend on lobbying. So that's one issue. The second issue is that we're a scientific organization. And so our role in this discussion is really to help people develop and promote the science regarding the benefits of transition for gender diverse youth. And I think, we had several presentations at the conference about that. Also, one of our plenary speakers was Chase Strangio, who is fighting these laws across the country through at the ACLU. And so, another tack that we're taking is making sure that our membership is educated about these issues and encouraging our membership to serve as experts in local legislative sessions to help fight these bills. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have received, a question did come in that I do want to, I can make some very additional brief comments. I did make some comments initially regarding questions about the recent article, and there are some follow-up questions. I did remark that the matter has been addressed internally, and what I can say is that part of the way that we have addressed that internally is having very clear guidance to board members on how to communicate with the press and how to make statements and what statements mean when speaking when you are a sitting member of the board, regardless of whether or not you're speaking as an individual or a board member. So thank you for that question. We have a question to kind of explore more about how USPath committees what are being developed and how can people join committees and get engaged. So is there anyone who would like to respond to those questions? Caroline?
Yeah, so I think the committee framework is going to be very exciting because it really expands leadership roles available through USPath. And it also can elevate those who might have not been, involved in leadership roles before, for example, like students and trainees. And as Maddie had mentioned, having a board liaison will also kind of keep a finger on the pulse, thinking about strategic initiatives from the board. So there are currently 6 committees that are defined, and we are working through the logistics with those committees. We are hopeful that communication will be coming out in the next few months, inviting people who are interested to join the committees to do so. So I invite all those who are members of USPath and who want to get involved to please look out for that communication. And it's a very expansive committee structure, so a wide range of interests and expertise that individuals can be involved with.
Great, thank you. We have a question that came in about how can, if you're a trans or non-binary person, either a member of USPath or a member of the journal community, but this particular question came up in the context of the conference we're having, and there were some breakout rooms that were protected spaces for trans and non-binary people. And there were some concerns expressed there. And so I think there's a kind of just a general question of how can these concerns, those are protected in private spaces, so we're not going to kind of air the details of what's been discussed there, but how can those things be taken into action? Basically, I think the high level question would be, how can we dismantle cis trans privilege and power structures that exist within the organization, and what can we do to, as a board, to facilitate that? Zil?
Sure. So as Maddie mentioned, I don't want to share anything that was expressed in a confidential space, but there are a few things that we've done with sort of our editorial privilege as the board to start these conversations. We had some plenary sessions that addressed the issues that are facing transgender people and what needs to be prioritized in research from a trans community perspective. We had several sessions on community-based participatory research. So we're using our editorial privilege to start to facilitate these conversations as much as we can, and really are relying on our membership to submit symposia or oral abstracts that address this question, because I think it is one of the next big questions in transgender health leadership and research is how do we dismantle these power structures? I am looking for resources discussing different biases that cisgender and transgender researchers bring to their work. I think that's an important place to start, and there are certainly still areas of the world where being transgender is considered a bias that should exclude you from this work. So I really think that we have a lot of work to do in this regard, and having more and more transgender professionals engage in this work is really the road forward to dismantling these power structures.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Ethan Cicero, which is kind of a follow-up question, I think, to some of the remarks I made at the beginning of the session, which, I don't know, Ethan, if you either were not there or if my remarks were not adequate, but I'll go on the assumption that my remarks were not adequate. And so, I will welcome other board members who want to weigh in on this as well. But, we don't have much actionable activity to show in the 2 years since the last meeting. That's true, and that's unfortunate, and that's insufficient. And I think it's important also to, again, highlight looking at the faces of the people that you're looking at right now on the board is not a group of people who represent the demographics of the trans community, the demographics of the United States of America. And that is a problem, and we are aware of it. And we have spent the last 2 years, there have been, I would say that probably more than half of our board meeting time has been spent talking about this issue in some way or another. And I think that, we have undergone a board training, and I think a lot of times this kind of work can be hand waving. It's just kind of window dressing, and we don't want window dressing. We want actionable activity. So my vision for the next 2 years is to translate the philosophical discussions and the kind of unpacking of the issues and the explorations of privilege and the recognition of the unconscious bias and the kind of structural racism that exists and the racism that exists just because of look at the board, and how can we now turn that into actionable, implementable, specific, achievable, relevant, time-bound interventions that will have an impact on diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-exclusion, anti-oppression for this organization. And that is what I want to work on for the next 2 years. And so what is that going to look like? That, you know, one thing we've talked about is having a mentorship and pipeline program. We need to have people who are in leadership roles who represent disadvantaged and minority groups. That's the true pathway to justice. We can't just have community advisory boards. We need to have people sitting in 2023 in this Brady Board School, will be in person hopefully by then, sitting on the dais, looking like America, looking like our populations that we serve. And so that is what we need to work on. I don't have actionable strategies that we're going to do this, and then on day 6 we're going to do this, and then at 3 months we're going to do that, because now we're going to just begin. I can only speak to what can happen. You know, I will take responsibility if in 2023 I'm sitting up here as a soon-to-be outgoing president, then I will have failed as president if we don't have something to show for that. And I want to turn it over now and open this up, see if there are any other comments that any other board members would like to make about that.
I just want to say one thing, which is support of Maddie's thought process here, and really to focus on action and not just talk. And you know, we're a group that's been building a base, and the base we've built is an imperfect base, and we want more of the membership to join us so that we can succeed with some of these actions. And I think time will tell. It's not like we're not hearing the message, but we're still not succeeding.
Great, thank you. We have a question about, has USPath considered developing an informational toolbox for members who interface with medical facilities, media, news organizations, or legislative political groups in the US? This is a great question. I hope maybe, Blaine, we can make note of this as something to integrate. You know, we certainly, as we work in getting our own ducks in a row internally with regards to board members responding to these kinds of inquiries, and again, going back to some of the remarks that were made about, you know, Zill made some remarks about limitations of what we as a nonprofit scientific organization can and can't say. But, you know, certainly we can try to make that something that we can disseminate out to others as well. I do want to kind of, you know, it's a great privilege to be on this board, and at the same time, all of us are volunteers, and other than Blaine and Jamie, who are the paid staff who kind of have to keep the lights on every day, we don't have any paid staff, and we don't have really much of a budget. So this is again a call. We don't really have any budget. So this is again a call for people who have these suggestions. And I've been going to WPATH and USPath meetings since 2007, and myself included, there's always great responses and questions, recommendations, and concerns that come up in these meetings. We need members to get involved. We need members to actually show up and do this work. These great ideas need to be implemented. And we need to find ways to translate ideas into something that's actionable and realistic. And so we'd love to have people who are bringing up these questions and ideas to follow up with the board, and then we can kind of work with you to give you some framework on, like, okay, this is how we take an idea, which sometimes you can call them a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, and turn it into an actionable item that can actually be implemented, and then we can actually, at some point in the future, show demonstrated actionable change. Anyone else on the board like to make any remarks?
I do. Also want to use this opportunity to kind of express our committees that are kind of really in the midst of forming. We have a advocacy and community liaison committee, which really should be really involved in this kind of activity in terms of reaching out and providing resources to people to inform others in the community about these issues. Whether it's tools to help them engage with local media, tools to write editorials, and so forth. So this is where members of the USPAC, have to really come together and really to start creating this infrastructure that can really take the information that is generated by our members and trying to use that and communicate that to others.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. Let's see, we have another committee question. Take another action towards the board's comment to intersectionality. How's the USPAC board plan to collaborate with others on causes in common, and what does that look like? It's certainly something that, you know, we have talked about. Again, we have to be cautious about causes. We are not a political or advocacy organization. We are a scientific organization. We're not supposed to do that, and we can actually get in trouble financially, like legally, for playing an advocacy role. We are a scientific organization. My personal opinion is that we should not be getting too into the advocacy pool, because that then begins to politicize our science. And I believe that transgender people and non-binary people deserve quality science, and that USPath is here to deliver that science. And when there are policies or laws that are happening that are counter to the science, then we can show up and talk science. But we have to, because of the way we're structured, and I think personally it's a good idea, to remain a field of getting into the advocacy role, because then we can be marked as an advocacy organization and our science will be taken into question. Okay, there's a question about transparency and how member dues and conference fees are used. I think I would probably, it looks like another board member wants to remark on that as well, but I would defer that. I mean, that's a question at this point we have to defer to WPATH, because USPath does not have a budget. All of our membership fees go directly to WPATH. Anyone else on the board want to make any remarks? We have a question about, hold on, I just lost my Q&A box here. So we have a question about SOC 8. That is something that we would defer to WPATH SOC.
On SOC, let me just jump in. WPATH has been pretty clear that they're trying to get it released by the end of the year, and we don't have any sneak previews or anything like that, but end of the year, so even if they run a little behind and it's a little early next year, but in months now, so looking forward to it.
Great. We have a question about cost and affordability. Again, I think unfortunately we have to defer that to WPATH, and I do want to make a comment about fees. WPATH membership fees, I as a physician, I have to be a member of several different professional organizations. Like my board certification is in emergency medicine, so I have to be a member of the American College of Emergency Physicians. So WPATH fees are much lower than any other professional organization I've ever been a member of. So I just want to kind of put that out there, that the WPATH fees are very reasonable, and to some degree impact the financial abilities of the organization to have impact to take on certain programs and activities. Anyone else want to make any remarks about that?
I think one thing that has been great about having an online conference is that there are no travel fees associated with that. So I think that was a great thing that we were able to do this year. I can't comment on what future conferences will look like, but I think one thing that we've learned from this pandemic is that traveling to professional conferences is prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, and we get different participation when conferences are available online.
Great, thank you. I just want to make a remark. There's been one particular attendee who's been sending a lot of questions about some particulars and specifics around the EHR question that came up earlier. And as right now, I mean, we're a bunch of board members, thousands of miles apart. We can't even lean over the kind of side to talk to each other. We definitely want to look at that. We definitely want to take that into consideration. And we need to go kind of talk about that at our next board meeting. So we've already kind of added that as a list of things that we need to sort of explore moving forward. Again, recognizing that kind of we have a large list of things we have to take on. We certainly want to take on as much as we can, but that certainly has been noted. So I just want to, the person was making several questions somewhat urgently. I want to make sure you know that you're heard, and we are making note of this. We just don't know that we can make any immediate response to that right now. And then I think currently, I believe that we look like we're mostly caught up with questions that we're able to answer. There are some questions that we're just not able to answer yet because we have to kind of go back and talk about it. So if are there any other remarks that the board members would like to make regarding anything that has come in? We've got just a few minutes left here, so maybe we can kind of go to final comments. Any remarks that any board members would like to make in summary?
Diane does have a question about what identity or skill set are we looking for new USPath members?
Oh, okay. Well, we have that information in the call for applications. I think that people who are interested in running for the board have attended this and are attending this session are getting a vibe for our group and have heard my vision for the next 2 years. So I think that people ideally will self-select to run. I ask that people consider running and getting involved, and I also ask that people think about if you are, what role you're running for. Think about if you're the best fit for that role, and if you are, then throw your hat into the ring. Great. We have a question that came in, like some other specific about would there be hybrid meetings rather as opposed to like in person only. We certainly can explore that as the board and kind of figure out how to do that. Certainly, as has been mentioned in other questions and comments here, we are definitely attuned to financial and travel related barriers that exist for people, and we want to address those. And there are other factors that come into play, and so we certainly will keep transparent with the organization as we begin planning the 2023 conference. We can certainly remain transparent about all the different factors that are going into what format that will be, as well as other vehicles for dissemination of information or engagement, such as the rapporteur program and other activities that can work to engage people who may not be able to be, sitting on the ground. It's likely 2023 will have an in-person component. So for people who can't be in person, we certainly will have vehicles for that to occur. Great. We have a question about, does scientific research include social sciences? It seems that this is medically based research only. We certainly have a strong arm of social sciences research within USPath, and there are social sciences researchers on the board. We certainly have that aspect. Any other final board members before we wrap up? Okay. Thank you. We have another comment that the questions that came in about, again, board accessibility. There was a recommendation about things like closed captioning or ASL interpretation. So again, we can continue to interrogate these. I think it is important to be transparent about some things. And that is, for example, that having things like real-time closed captioning and ASL is incredibly expensive. And so we have a triangle of, we need to lower admissions, we need to lower membership fees, we need to make sure that conference attendance fees are accessible, and then the fees that are associated with offering some of these services are sometimes basically prohibitive. So, we certainly can remain transparent again as we begin to, and I ask that the staff can make note of these concerns so that when it comes time to plan the next round of conferences, all of these concerns about forum, hybrid, accessibility, and we certainly explore those. And then if there are things that we're not able to logistically do for whatever reason, that we maintain early transparency, as well as efforts that we're making as an organization to try and bridge these as much as possible. And with that, I think it's maybe appropriate now to adjourn this meeting. And we thank you very much.